Hi, I'm back, and today we're looking at a video from Principles and Choices, which seems to be another one of these educational groups. Now, this video is apparently from a DVD that they sell, which is about the 4 levels of happiness. So, let's dive into it. It starts off with the question, what's the one thing we all want more than anything else? The answer is apparently happiness, and then comes the question, where do you find happiness? Then it jumps into Ray Comfort-esque interviews, where they ask random people on the street relatively deep philosophical questions, so that we can see their terrible answers.
Happiness comes from cars, yo.
Now, if you really want to know where happiness comes from, I think that you should look for the answer in psychology, and when you do that, you'll find that the answer is not straightforward at all. And that's partly because the question isn't really straightforward, because we don't even really know how to define happiness. The definition seems to vary depending on the context. And it's also difficult because there's a lot of pseudoscience in psychology. For example, when looking this up, you may or may not come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which sounds like it makes sense, but it has no basis in anything. It's completely pseudoscience. But for our purposes, let's define happiness as a state of overall psychological well-being. And let's look at the more objective things that we can find. And when you do that, you'll find that there's a whole lot of things that affect our happiness. It's not really any one thing that you can pin it down on. Happiness comes from achievements or feelings of achievements, interpersonal relationships, genetic makeup, and a lack of stress is also important. Or just being able to cope with stress.
Since the beginning, people have always tried to find happiness in physical pleasure. Things you can touch, see, and taste. The problem with physical pleasure is it only lasts a moment. Then it's a memory.
Okay, sure, that makes sense, but you also get enjoyment out of those memories. And if you do things that you enjoy often, then your overall enjoyment level goes up.
Well, I don't really think there's anything wrong with enjoying physical pleasure and material things, but if that's all you care about, then you're not gonna really be happy. You're just gonna get bored with the stuff.
Yeah, sure. For some people, not everybody is happy from the same thing. Some people are perfectly content being by their own, doing whatever they enjoy. That's what makes some people happy. But yes, there are more factors than just items and activities that you enjoy in the moment.
Most people realize before long that physical pleasure and material things are not enough to really make us happy. So they move on to a second kind of happiness. It's called ego gratification.
Wait, did you see that? That was some nice fake typing. That's just wonderful. And I like how you fake type this into the search bar and somehow it comes up here. We see right through your disguise. But I'd like to point out what they're doing here. They say we all start off with material physical pleasures, and then we go on to ego gratification. We'll go on to what they think that is in a minute, but that's not how it works. There's no reason to think that we go from this one level of this one thing that we think makes us happy, and then jump to this other thing that we think makes us happy. It's far more complex than that, and there's no reason to think that people naturally just jump to these levels that you've defined. This is what I consider to be pseudo-education. What they're saying has no basis in anything, but they're also not really trying to prove it. They're just trying to teach it to you. And it seems like it makes sense. It's something that's easy to grasp and easy to sort of see when you look at other people's behavior, but it's not accurate. But for now, let's go on with ego gratification.
It's the kind of happiness that comes from self-esteem, from feeling good about yourself. Like when you win or succeed at something, or when you compare yourself to other people and you're better at something than they are, or when people notice you, or like you, or want you around.
Now, at first when I heard this, I was kind of confused because it partly seemed like they were referring to a sort of egotism or an inflated view of oneself. And it looks like in some places, some people are confusing this with that a little bit. But overall, it looks like this is just self-esteem and accomplishments, which is good. It's one of the many things, the many parts of what can make you happy. But it's not the whole story, and it's not like you jump from physical pleasure to this, then to another thing, and to another thing. There are many things that go on together at the same time to make you happy or unhappy.
We live in a world full of hurt and suffering. But when we live for ourselves, we end up walking past all the people in need, hoping to avoid eye contact. But what if we stopped excusing ourselves? What if we put the wants of ourselves aside and focused on the needs of others? The happiness you get out of making a difference to someone else just might surprise you.
Honestly, I don't really have much more to say at this point, except that if you're helping others to feel like you're making a difference in the world, then that's sort of to boost your self-esteem, which is not a bad thing, but it's just the same thing as what you said before. But sure, you can feel happy by making other people feel better. Let's continue.
We've been talking, and we think that the narrator dude is right. Physical pleasure and ego gratification and making a positive difference for other people are all good things that bring different kinds of happiness, but they're not enough.
They're not? I don't know. I think physical pleasure's kind of fun.
They're not?
No.
Why not? I don't know. I think physical pleasure's kind of fun.
Okay, don't say it like that. You look like a creep. Come on.
What are you talking about?
Don't act like you don't know. You know exactly what he's talking about. You're not that innocent.
Okay, remember we were in the car and you were driving and I was saying how sometimes people make it seem like you're supposed to find happiness from being kind to other people. But then sometimes you do that and you're still not really happy. Like it's not enough.
Oh, yeah. And you said that what people really wanted is unconditional love and to feel like totally at home in the universe or cosmos or whatever you said. And that what people really were looking for is God.
Okay, not everybody has this deeply ingrained need for something more. Not everybody feels this necessity to have a place in the world or a meaning within the cosmos or a God to appeal to. And if they do, it's because that's what they were taught. If you were taught that there is a greater, higher power out there, then yeah, you're going to feel like you need to connect with it somehow, maybe. But if you're never taught any such thing, then it never crosses your mind. A lot of the times, anyways. I don't feel that need because I'm not convinced that there's anything out there. I feel happy without believing in a God or a greater purpose or higher power. Probably because I don't feel like there is one. So I don't feel like I'm missing that, like I'm missing that connection with this being. Now, perhaps such an idea will appeal to us when we're vulnerable, but that doesn't mean that's what we need to be happy. I mean, a God or another sort of higher power can very well be used as a coping mechanism, sure, and that definitely can help. But if we are satisfied with the relationships that we have and the things that we do and have, I guess, then it's not a necessity.
And you can't ever prove God exists. I mean, or that he loves us if he did exist.
Actually, I think you can.
Ooh, we're getting into the juicy stuff now. This is my bread and butter. Tell me something I haven't heard before. It's gonna be pretty difficult, but go ahead and try.
Okay, just look at all the evidence from...
Obviously, she has more to say on this than we have time for.
Ah, come on.
There's a ton of evidence that God exists in science, math, physics, cosmology, philosophy.
Where's the mathematical proof that God exists? How does that even work? Can we not have a square root of 3 if there is no God? Was it God who told us the exact number of pi? Does God solve all the problems of special relativity? I don't understand. Anyway, that's where this particular video ends. However, there's another video on this same channel, which seems to be from the same DVD, but it just picks up where we left off and seems to go through the end of it. maybe. I don't know how long this DVD actually is. But let's switch to the different video, which is significantly lower quality.
The point is, nearly everyone wants to be perfectly happy. Everybody wants to be unconditionally loved.
And if they got that from, say, family members or loved ones, then they would be happy. But I guess if they don't have that, then they can have the idea of a god to make them happier, to feel like they are loved. But that's a coping mechanism, and it doesn't actually require God to exist.
The good that we can do in this world is never perfect, and it doesn't really last. So what do? Well, either life is meaningless because you can't ever really have what you want deep in your heart, or she's right, and there really is a God who's unconditionally loving and can fulfill all of our deepest desires.
Okay, wait, if you can't really have what you want deep in your heart, that doesn't mean that life is meaningless. There's a difference between meaning and purpose. Now, if you feel like you can't perform your purpose, then yeah, I guess that can be disheartening, but that doesn't mean that there's no meaning. Now, to be perfectly clear, I don't think that there's any inherent purpose or meaning in anyone, but you can define your own purpose and meaning. And if you define your purpose to be happy, then yeah, you very well can achieve that. Well, most of us, anyway. But that doesn't mean that you need to believe in a god or a higher power. So here's what we've learned so far. There are 4 levels of happiness. You start off, apparently, with just physical pleasure, and then, if that's not enough, then you go on to ego gratification, which I guess is the same as self-esteem. Then you go on to helping others, and then you look towards a god, I guess. None of this has any basis in anything, and remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? This seems to be in the same vein as that, and has less to back it up. It's completely unscientific, unverified in every way, but it sounds like it can make sense, like this does apply to you. You can very well be convinced of this because it makes sense. But it's not accurate. And if you're taught this as a child, as perhaps you are if you're the kind of person to be watching this DVD in the first place, then yeah, it can make you feel like you do need God to be happy. Being taught this does instill this sort of need to feel like a God loves you. But if you weren't taught that, then you may not feel that need at all. And none of this takes into account the happiness that we get from interpersonal relationships or being close to other people. And it doesn't account for the level of stress, which a lack of stress will definitely help you feel happier. And it also doesn't account for things like emotional support. Now, feeling like you have accomplished or are accomplishing a sort of purpose that you feel you have in life, yes, that does make you feel better, but that's also part of self-esteem, which was level 2, not level 4. But it's also about how you view yourself. It's your personal feeling. It's not like you need this higher power or this god, but instead you need the idea of it, and that makes you feel comfortable. For some people anyways. So if there is no god, or if you don't believe in a god, then you can't be happy because there's no ultimate meaning or purpose in your life. That's not how happiness works. Happiness comes from overall well-being, and your feelings of your overall well-being. It's far more complicated than that, and it doesn't only come from one thing, or even only 4 things. Even if you have all of that, then a significant amount of stress can just take all of that away and make you unhappy. And not everybody feels happiness from the same things. If you believe in a god, then that gives you a feeling of, for one, fulfillment of your own life, but also a sort of connection with this god. If you believe in a personal God, and that gives you sort of relationship. You also feel like you have answers to certain stressors in your life, and that can be used as a coping mechanism. Not only that, but if you believe in the religion of your community, then that gives you a feeling of community with those people. My point is that believing in this God doesn't ultimately make you happy, but there are certain aspects of religion that do make you happy, that you don't need religion per se, but religion can put in a nice little package for you. Religion isn't a necessity, but it can make more accessible certain things that do make us happy.
I'll bet a lot of you guys are going to have the same questions you're about to hear.
I'm pretty sure I'm level 3 or 4 person. And it seems to me that level 3 and 4 don't just make you happier. They also make the world a better place. I mean, think about what the world would be like if everybody only cared about level 1 and level 2.
That is not a question. I'm very disappointed in you.
There are a lot of cultures that just emphasize levels 1 and 2. And those cultures usually don't come up with great systems of education and hospitals and charities that help the poor. You don't see a lot of egotistical cultures and cultures that are only looking for physical pleasure, wanting to make a positive difference to people who are weak or vulnerable or sick. So those aren't typically the kinds of cultures that most people want to live in.
I think that you're talking about a very complex set of issues that you don't actually know anything about. The reason that some countries are impoverished, or that they don't have good educational systems and other things, isn't just because, oh, the government is only thinking about themselves and they're corrupt. I mean, that can very well be the case. A corrupt government can make a terrible country. But there's so many more factors that go into it. There's economics, there's socio-political issues. That's all that I can think of off the top of my head, but you think you have the world figured out, but that's not how it works. Especially since these 4 levels aren't really a thing.
So like Nazi Germany.
Yeah, and black slavery and mine human sacrifices.
Of course, somehow they'd figure out a way to bring up Nazi Germany. Need I remind you that Nazi Germany was always vast majority Christian. The Holocaust was perpetrated by Christians. And, as far as slavery, in the US, it was the conservative Christians who were fighting so strongly against abolition. They wanted slavery to be legal, and they used the Bible to justify it. The Bible is very, very pro-slavery. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, don't enslave anyone. The Bible does not condemn slavery. In fact, it does the exact opposite, telling slaves to obey their masters.
Well, I think our culture is very level 1 and level 2. There's just so much emphasis on how you look and how smart and talented you are.
It's like all the media ever talks about is the famous and popular people, but if you actually look at them, their lives are so messed up.
Right, because it's so difficult in our culture to give to charity, and there's no pressure to do that at any time at all. It's not like the Salvation Army ever sits in front of a Walmart entrance, ringing a bell, being obnoxious, asking for donations. It's not like there's any rich philanthropists at all. They're nowhere to be found. I've never seen a commercial with very sad music and videos of sad animals asking you to adopt or to send money to an animal shelter. We never see those sorts of things. We never see anybody being praised for being charitable. It never happens.
I think level 2 is important, but they don't ever talk about the good things that are happening on TV. I mean, if you go on YouTube, you can get a lot of videos about people doing really great things for other people. But you only get like one story about that every now and then. And it's like, just because they want to make you feel good. But they just spend the rest of the time pushing level 1 and 2.
Drama and conflict, that sells. That's what brings in a lot of attention, especially to news outlets and stuff. That's just kind of how it is. It's far easier to gain a following talking about drama and stuff than not.
So like, what level of happiness is YouTube?
Oh, naive little child. As an internet personality myself, I can say with confidence that there is no happiness in YouTube.
So why are things that we need for our survival, like food, so unimportant?
Oh, they're not unimportant. God takes level 1 very seriously, and he cares a lot about your physical needs. Like in the Bible, he sent manna to the ancient Israelites who were wandering around in the desert so they wouldn't starve to death, right?
Okay, sure, cool, that's a nice story, but what about all the famines that God caused? Did you think about those? And that's more or less where the video ends. There's not much more to talk about. So, in summary, happiness is far more complex than it seems. And this 4 levels of happiness, it may sound like it makes sense, but there's no basis for it and it's not accurate. If you are looking for happiness, then you know what makes you happy better than other people do, and you know how you should search that out better than some religious teacher can. Learning to cope with stress, having close interpersonal relationships, doing things that you enjoy, like baths. I don't know what it is people enjoy, but doing that stuff, that all can very well increase your happiness, as well as setting goals for yourself, or feeling like you have done or are doing what you feel like you should. And a lot of it actually has to do with genetics. If you are genetically predisposed to depression, then that genuinely makes it harder for you to physically feel happy. And if you live in some sort of condition that impairs you and adds a lot of stress, that can make you unhappy as well. So learning to cope with that is also important. Being religious is by no means necessary, but perhaps it can provide some things that would be a little bit more difficult to have otherwise, like a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of fulfillment or purpose in life. But it's not so much about exactly what's going on as much as it is your attitude about it. God doesn't really make you feel happy or fulfilled, but you feel that way in response to the idea. That's your attitude towards it, and that's what makes you feel good. It's all really in your mind, and that makes it far more complicated than you can really cover in this short amount of time. But that's all I have for this video. Thank you for watching.